My name is Evelyn Drake. I'm 38 years old, and the email that shattered my family fit on a single line. I read it at 5 in the morning Tokyo time, on the 45th floor of a hotel 8,000 miles from the lakeside cabin my husband and I built with our own hands. My parents had sold it. Sold my property to settle my sister's gambling debts. The email ended with a question. You didn't need it anyway, right? I didn't reply. I didn't scream into a pillow. I made one phone call instead, and then another. And what the real estate agent told my parents 3 days later is a moment my mother still refers to as the misunderstanding. The county prosecutor called it something else. Stay with me. You'll want to hear what my parents didn't know. Welcome back to their secret stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet women find their voice. If you've ever been the responsible one, the one everyone leans on, the one nobody ever asks about, this story belongs to you too. Drop a comment below with your city and time, and be sure to subscribe. Let me tell you what they sold so you understand what that email actually meant. Solitude Cabin sits on a high ridge overlooking Whispering Pines, Oregon, on land my grandmother Genevieve left to me. To me, by name, in a will she wrote in her own elegant, steady cursive. Lucas and I built the house ourselves. Weekends and vacations, 5 long years of them. I'm a civil engineer, he's an architect and stonemason. Our honeymoon fund became the concrete foundation pour. I calculated every load path, he framed every wall. In 2017, a severe mudslide took half the unfinished deck into the ravine, and we simply started that section over without a single argument, because that's who we are. Lucas' hand carved the heavy newel post at the bottom of the stairs and set our initials deep into it. E and L, carved deep enough to outlive us both. My grandmother's walnut writing desk went into the study, the same desk she used to manage her household through 2 major recessions. And here's the part that matters: my family used that house every summer, 2 weeks in August. My parents in the master bedroom. My sister Chloe on the sunroom David. Barbecues, board games, everyone welcome. I never once locked that door against my family. It never occurred to me that I would need to. My dad taught me to draft schematics when I was 10 years old at his workbench, tracing load lines with a carpenter's pencil. I became an engineer because of that man. Nearly 30 years later, he forged my name on a document I had never seen, so a stranger could buy the house my grandmother's land was holding up. But I'm getting ahead of the story. First, the email. I was in week 3 of a 5-week job. I was in Tokyo consulting on a high-rise development, the biggest contract our small firm had ever landed. I woke at 4:47 a.m. to my phone glowing on the nightstand. One new email from Mom. Subject line, good news about Chloe. I want you to read it the way I read it. In a dark hotel room in a country where it was already tomorrow, Evelyn. Your father and I have sold the lakeside cabin to settle your sister's debts. It's done, so please don't make a fuss. The buyers are lovely people, and it all worked out. You didn't need it anyway, right? And then the postscript. My mother's signature move, the little bow on the box. Don't make this into a thing. Family handles family. I sat up. I read it again. I read it a 3rd time. The way you recheck a structural calculation that can't possibly say what it says. Sold the cabin. Doan. One short question. And every word of it had been true her whole life. Whatever Evelyn has, Evelyn can spare. I noticed my hands were perfectly steady, which frightened me more than shaking would have. I did not type a reply. There was no sentence I could write that she would actually hear. It was 4:49 in the morning in Tokyo, which made it 4:49 in the afternoon on the Oregon coast. Offices were open, people were reachable, and things could still be done. My mother had sent an email and gone to bed feeling lighter. She was about to learn something about me that 20 years of quiet bailouts had hidden from her. I don't fuss, I file. I picked up the phone and I did not call her. I called Lucas. It was 5:00 p.m. his time, and he was still on a job site in Bend. I read him the email once, flatly, and there was a heavy silence filled with the background hum of machinery. Then my husband said the exact right thing, which is his particular genius. I'm driving out there. Stay on the phone. 50 minutes from Bend to Whispering Pines. I listened to that drive from the other side of the planet. The turn signal. The gravel crunching under tires. Then his voice went low and careful. Eve, there's a moving truck in the driveway. Men are carrying boxes out, and there's a locksmith's van. Someone was drilling out my locks, while my husband stood on my grandmother's land, watching it happen. Lucas doesn't yell. He just gets quieter and tougher. I could hear it over the line as he told the crew chief to put down whatever he was holding. The crew chief made a quick phone call. And through the speaker of that phone, across all those thousands of miles, I heard a voice I'd recognize in a hurricane. My mother, tiny, bright, absolutely certain. Tell them to keep working. It's a family property. A family property. Lucas called 911 from the front porch steps. Trespass. Property dispute officer dispatched. That call, logged at 5:58 p.m., became the first official document in what the state of Oregon would eventually call its case. I sat on my hotel bed in the dark, doing the only thing I could do from there, making a list, because lists are how I pray. Then Lucas came back on the line, and his voice had a crack in it I'd only heard once before, at his father's funeral. Eve, your grandmother's walnut desk. It's already on the back of the truck. Here is what I did from a hotel desk 8,000 miles away, in between high-pressure site meetings. I still ran on zero sleep because the high-rise project didn't care about my family drama. I filed a report through the Whispering Pines Police Department's online portal, attachments perfectly in order. I emailed the detective assigned to the case, Detective Vance, financial crimes, a complete package that he later told me most victims take a month to assemble. The deed history, the LLC operating agreement, my credit freeze confirmations, and a notarized letter dated October 2020. That letter is the part of this story I need you to hear, because it answers the question you're probably already asking. How does a grown woman get blindsided by her own parents and happen to have an entire legal folder ready to go? Because it wasn't the first time. In 2020, a credit alert pinged my phone at work. A Wealth 12,000 personal loan application, co-signed. My name was on it, my social security number, and my father's handwriting doing its absolute best impression of mine. For Chloe, of course. For her credit card bills after her third collection notice. Of course, I shut it down in 5 days. I confronted my dad, who just stared silently at his boots. My mother's response was not an apology. It was a performance review. You embarrassed your father over simple paperwork. Evelyn. Family handles family. The family verdict came back that I had overreacted. So I did what overreacting civil engineers do. I stopped arguing. And I quietly redesigned the structure. That fall, Lucas and I made structural changes to our assets that they never asked about because they had never once asked about my life, only my liquidity. Detective Vance read my 2020 letter, reviewed the rest of the folder, and emailed me back within 2 hours. His first sentence was the most beautiful thing a stranger has ever written to me, Mrs. Drake. I need you to verify a signature. The scam came through at midnight my time. A power of attorney, 1 page, notarized at a shipping storefront counter in Salem. Evelyn Drake, written in round, patient letters, granting her father full authority over her real property, dated this past spring. I sat very still and performed the strangest audit of my life, examining my own signature for fraud. I recognized its skeleton immediately. The way you recognize a building you once stamped drawings for. In 2020, before the loan incident, back when I still said, yes, reflexively, I had signed a real power of attorney for my dad. It was a limited scope document, meant only for the transfer of a small wooded lot while I was overseas for work. It had a strict 90-day expiration, one parcel, one purpose. I keep copies of everything. I'm told it's a personality flaw. Side by side on my laptop screen, the two documents told the whole story, the same bones. My real signature had been photocopied and pasted into a new document. The date had been digitally altered, the scope rewritten from a single lot to all real property indefinitely, a dead permission slip dug up and dressed in a suit, and the handwriting on the alterations was my father's. Of course it was. My dad is the only person alive who ever practiced my signature for fun when I was in college, forging my autograph on a diner napkin. For when you're famous, Evie, he'd laughed. 18 years later, that party trick had a criminal case number. Here's what I've learned about forged signatures since then. There are two kinds. There is the greedy kind, and there is the kind done by people who have convinced themselves it isn't really theft. Because what's yours was always somehow the family's. The second kind is much worse. The second kind comes with a clear conscience, and a clear conscience doesn't know how to stop. I let 48 hours pass before I called my mother because I wanted my voice level and my questions short. She answered on the first ring, warm as a heating pad. Sweetheart, so you got my email. I asked 3 questions. Engineer's order. Who signed the paperwork? Where is the money? Where is Chloe? And my mother, I'll give her this, did not lie to me, she explained. The debt had gotten terrifying. Dangerous men had been calling the house looking for Chloe. Real men, real threats. The Emerald Casino had offered to close out her high stakes marker if a 60,000 landed in their accounts before Friday. The buyers for the cabin had been found through George Finch. You remember George. He sold the Henderson place down the road. The deposit had come through, and 60,000 of it had gone directly to the casino. Done. Chloe was safe. Your father and I did what had to be done, Evelyn. Someday you'll understand that. Not one syllable of apology. You can't apologize for the weather, and in my mother's mind, this was just weather. I asked my 4th question off script. Does Chloe know how you got the money? 2 full seconds of heavy silence, the longest I'd ever heard from her. Your sister doesn't need to be involved in paperwork. Involved in paperwork. My name forged onto a legal instrument had become paperwork, filed under things sensitive people shouldn't have to see. I told her I'd be home in 2 weeks. My mother, sensing a shift in my calm, the way animals sense a drop in atmospheric pressure, went soft and coaxing. It was the voice she used to sing my fevers down with when I was a child. Come home, sweetheart. We'll sit around the table. Family handles family, Evelyn. In the house, not in the street. She had no idea the street was already moving. I handed the high-rise project over to my second, in command a week early. The first time in my career I had ever done that. The client shook my hand warmly and said, family comes first. I managed not to laugh in his face. An 18-hour flight. Lucas met me at the Portland airport at midnight, holding a coffee made exactly the way I actually take it. He didn't ask how I was, because he already knew, and because he'd been incredibly busy. In the truck, with the dome light on, he handed me a clipboard. My husband courts me with clipboards. It was an inventory list in his neat carpenter's pencil, divided into 3 columns: recovered, pending, gone. He had spent 4 days driving to local antique shops, consignment dealers, and estate liquidators with photos on his phone. Buying back my grandmother's dining chairs, our books, the porch rockers, intercepting what he could before it scattered into strangers' homes. Recovered was a long column. Pending was shorter. Gone had 11 lines. I read those lines at a red light and made a sound I didn't plan to make. Lucas put his hand over mine on the clipboard. We built it once, Evie. Hands remember. That was the only speech he made. That's Lucas. My family spent 20 years teaching me that love is a wire transfer with guilt attached. This man builds his love out of lists, gas mileage, and buying back our own rocking chairs at a 40% markup without a single word of complaint. There's a profound lesson in that difference, and this entire story runs on it. On the seat between us sat a thick manila envelope with my name in unfamiliar print. Detective Vance had dropped it off that afternoon. "Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Drake." The formal complaint. I held it in my lap the entire dark drive home. It weighed nothing at all, and it weighed everything. Now, let me tell you the thing my parents didn't know. The detail I promised you at the beginning. After the 2020 loan stunt, I didn't yell. Yelling is for people who expect the other side to change. Instead, I re-engineered. That fall, on our lawyer's strict advice, Lucas and I transferred Solitude Cabin into a limited liability company, Ridgeview LLC. 2 members, Evelyn and Kenneth Lucas Drake. Any sale, any mortgage, any transfer of that property required 2 physical member signatures, both of us in ink, together. We moved all property correspondence to a post office box in Bend. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus. I documented the 2020 forgery in a letter and had it officially notarized, not to punish my father, and I never sent it to anyone. I did it because engineers keep records of the very first crack. It's how you prove later that the collapse wasn't sudden. My mother would call all of this paranoid. It isn't paranoia, it's my profession. Nobody designs a bridge for a sunny, calm day. You design it for the worst possible load that will ever cross it. And I had watched the worst possible load rehearse. Here is what that paperwork actually meant in the spring of 2026. My parents had sold a house they had absolutely no legal power to sell. The forged power of attorney was written against Evelyn Drake, private citizen. But Evelyn Drake, private citizen, hadn't owned that cabin for 6 years. The deed said Ridgeview LLC, and the LLC required 2 signatures. No title search on earth was going to miss that. Their sale wasn't just fraudulent. It was structurally impossible. A staircase drawn in thin air. The only question left was who would tell them, me or the title company. I chose the title company. They have much better timing. While I was flying home, Detective Vance had been dissecting the anatomy of the deal, and it deserves a moment of attention because every number in it tells you everything about desperation. The buyers were a couple called the Sterlings, cash buyers from Seattle, and they thought they'd found the deal of the decade. An oceanfront ridge cabin appraised near $920,000, offered at $590,000, far below market value. It was a massive red flag, but they swallowed it because a bargain makes people cooperative. They were in such a hurry to lock it down that they signed a release my lawyer still reads out loud at dinner parties. 10% down, $59,000, released directly to the sellers upon signing, not held in escrow. In a normal real estate deal, absolutely no one agrees to that. But in a rural deal brokered between friendly parties by a local agent, apparently you just initial the box. The agent was George Finch. 30 years of selling shore and ridge properties, a man who had known my parents since church picnics, which is exactly why he didn't look too closely at a power of attorney handed to him by people he trusted. Within 36 hours of that deposit landing, $60,000 of it was wired directly to the Emerald Casino to clear my sister's debt. Detective Vance traced it in a single afternoon. Money leaves footprints, even when families try not to. So set the board the way it stood that week. The Sterlings believed they had bought a cabin. George believed he had brokered a clean sale. My parents believed they had saved their daughter and were busy delivering casseroles to their neighbors. And a title company in Whispering Pines had a routine title search scheduled for Thursday morning. Thursday. Remember Thursday. Before Thursday, though. I had to walk through my own house, and I want to put you inside that hour, because a burglary by total strangers would have been kinder. The police had already photographed everything. Detective Vance met us with the key, my new key for my new lock on my own door. Half the house was gone. Not ransacked, worse. Neatly gone, professionally packed by men paid by the hour, nail holes in the drywall where our wedding photos used to hang. The study held its breath around a clean, unfaded rectangle on the hardwood floor where my grandmother's walnut desk had stood for 6 years. Bright squares on the walls, felt pads on the floor with no furniture over them. A house turned into an inventory of empty shapes. I called my mother that night about one thing only: the desk. Lucas's consignment shop hunt hadn't found it yet, and I kept my voice in the exact flat range I use when dealing with difficult building inspectors. Her answer came back so easily that I realized she'd had it ready for years, a sentence just waiting for its occasion. She had 2, Evelyn. You have a whole house. She had 2. My grandmother, who managed a household through 2 recessions, had owned exactly 2 pieces of high-quality furniture. And therefore I was greedy for grieving one. That is the toxic arithmetic my mother runs the world on. Whatever the responsible child has is a surplus. Whatever the drowning child needs is a debt everyone else owes. I hung up politely. I've been polite my whole life. It's load-bearing. Then Lucas called me over to the staircase. I stood at the bottom and looked at what the movers had started but hadn't finished. And something in my chest went completely off plumb the newel post. Our newel post, with our initials E and L carved deep, was half unbolted. It was tagged in grease pencil as a fixture for handover. The family meeting happened at my parents' house in Eugene that Sunday. I went on Detective Vance's advice: keep the channel open. Let them talk. And if I'm honest, I went because some 38-year-old muscle in me still walked toward that kitchen table whenever I was called. They were all deployed. Mom at the head of the table. Dad beside her studying his knuckles. Aunt Clara flanking them. A lemon cake sat in the center like a white flag of surrender. No Chloe. Your sister is very fragile right now, my mother said, which answered a question I hadn't even asked. Then came the presentation, because it was, in fact, a sales pitch. The family would make this right. A payment plan, something reasonable monthly, once things settled down. In exchange, I would call that nice detective and tell him it was all just a big misunderstanding. The word misunderstanding did a lot of heavy lifting that afternoon. We will handle it where it belongs, my mother said, folding her hands. In the house. Then she delivered her law, the one I was raised under. This family doesn't let family drown. Around the table, heads nodded in unison, as if a church choir had finished a hymn. I looked at the lemon cake. I did the math. A payment plan out of what? I asked. You're both retired. Dad's pension is fixed. The deposit is entirely gone to the Emerald Casino. Pay me back with what? The silence lasted long enough to hear the kitchen clock ticking. We both knew the answer. They would pay with the next thing. And then the next. There is always a next thing until the responsible child finally runs out of things to give. My mother's eyes drifted to the window, to the yard, to the house itself around us, and I watched her choose not to say it. I stood up, thanked Aunt Clara for the cake, and left before my face could file a report of its own. That evening, I drove out to the cabin alone. I sat on the third stair, the stair Lucas and I spent an entire August getting exactly right, recutting the stringers twice because I refused to accept a squeak. I put my hand on the half-unbolted newel post. 2 lag bolts were loose. 2 were still holding. Our initials were tilted a few degrees off true, catching my flashlight at a wrong angle, leaning like something on a sinking ship. Someone had been paid by the hour to remove the exact object my husband had made to say we existed, sitting there in my winter coat in my own freezing house. I finally saw my own blueprint clearly. My entire life, in every crisis, I had run the exact same calculation. How do I engineer a fix where I save everyone? Save Chloe from the debt, save Dad from the shame, save Mom from the neighbors, save the family from the truth. Everyone, every single time, except the woman actually doing the math. That's not love. That's what my mother's law had made of me. Not a daughter, but a load-bearing wall that nobody thanks until the ceiling collapses. In the morning, I drove to the Whispering Pines Police Department. I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes, watching a man walk his dog past the flagpole, looking at how ordinary the rest of the world was. Then I went inside and signed the criminal complaint. My real signature, the one with 38 years of my hand in it, on the one document in this entire mess that told the truth. Detective Vance notarized it without any dramatic ceremony, which I deeply appreciated. Some things you want done quietly, like plumbing. Here is what I knew as the pen lifted certain bolts, once backed out, never bite the same threads again. I had just permanently become the daughter who called the police on her own parents. I drove home with my hands perfectly steady on the wheel, my old life unraveling behind me. Let me pause right here. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and pressing charges, between being the good daughter and being a whole, respected person, tell me in the comments what you chose and what it cost you. I read every single one, and make sure to subscribe because the phone call that blew this entire case open is about 2 minutes away. Thursday, 11:40 a.m. I know the timeline like a verse of scripture because I heard it twice under oath and once across a kitchen table. The title company ran its routine search on Solitude Cabin, and the file came back the way a failed bridge inspection comes back when someone has been trying to sell a bridge they don't own. Record owner Ridge View LLC. Transfer authority 2-member signatures required. Document submitted a power of attorney executed by Evelyn Drake, private individual. Legally. It was a key to a door that had been replaced 6 years ago. The deal didn't just wobble, it died right there on the table. The title officer, called George Finch, and George, with 30 years of reputation on the line, understood in a single sentence what he was holding and what he had passed along to cash buyers with his name attached to it. He sat in his car in the office parking lot for a while. He told me this himself later over terrible diner coffee. And then he dialed my parents' landline. My mother answered and put it on speaker. Her hands, she testified later, were shaking. George Finch, family friend, church picnic George, said the sentences that ended the misunderstanding. Heir of this story, Eleanor, the sale is dead. The house isn't yours to sell. It isn't even Evelyn's personally. It's owned by an LLC and has been for years. And Eleanor, I have to ask you the question the title office just asked me, and I need you to think very hard before you answer. Who signed this power of attorney? On the other end of that line, in the kitchen where I had learned to draft schematics, there was a long silence. And then, faintly, the sound of my father being physically sick in the sink. What happened next happened the way structures fail quietly in the paperwork. and then all at once in the physical world. The Sterlings wanted their 59,000 back, loudly, urgently. But it wasn't their 60,000 of it was sitting in a casino's ledger, and casinos are not known for issuing refunds. So the Sterlings hired an aggressive lawyer, and that lawyer sent the kind of demand letter that gets immediately forwarded to criminal detectives. George Finch, desperately protecting the professional license he'd held for 3 decades, filed a full report with the State Real Estate Commission. Every document, every date, every text message, and copied the police, which meant the file on Detective Vance's desk assembled itself like a rapid house building. Forgery of a legal instrument, grand theft by deception. The words stopped being my personal grievances and became the charges of the state of Oregon, printed under an official seal. I learned something that nobody tells you about justice. Once you hand the truth over to a process, the process doesn't check in with your feelings before it moves. My parents went from sellers to criminal subjects in the span of a single week. A detective photographed the notary log at the shipping store. A handwriting examiner got a subpoena for my 2020 files. The neighbors who had received casseroles now gossiped over their fences. And me, I did nothing. That is the part my family never believed afterward. They thought I was pulling levers, calling in favors, orchestrating their downfall. In reality, I had signed one true document and stepped back. The consequences my parents had outrun for 20 years finally arrived under their own power, punctual as the tide. The night the Sterling's lawyer's demand letter landed, my phone lit up on my workbench. 14 missed calls from Mom spread over 4 hours, each voicemail shorter than the last. Underneath them, one text from my sister Chloe. Our first contact in months, no greeting. Just one blunt line. What did you do? The family group chat was called the Drake Clan. For over a decade, it carried birthday reminders, recipe shares, and logistics. In the span of a week, it became a virtual courtroom where I was the sole defendant, and everyone else wore a judge's robe. Screenshots reached me even after I muted the notifications. She called the police on her own parents over simple paperwork. They are in their late 70s. For God's sake, who raised her? The woman who forged my signature raised me. I did not reply. And then Aunt Clara came to Bend. I want to be entirely fair to Aunt Clara because she is not a villain. She is simply what the system looks like when it's terrified. She stood on my porch with a tin of homemade lemon bars, already crying before I could open the door. Maggie, withdraw the complaint. They're old. Your mother isn't sleeping. Whatever this is, the family can settle it in the house. We always settle it in the house. I brought her in, made her tea, and listened to every single word all the way to the bottom, because she had earned that over 40 years of being kind to me. When she finally wound down, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, I said the only thing I had left to say, Clara, in the house, is where this monster was raised. 20 years of settling things in the house is how a $12,000 loan became a forged deed. The house doesn't settle things. The house just buries them under the floorboards and calls the lump a rug. She left unhappy, the lemon bars left unclaimed on the counter. Standing in my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, I saw the price sheet clearly. I could be right or I could be invited. Not both. Not this year. That night, my phone rang again. Chloe. And for the first time in longer than I care to admit, I actually answered my sister. She sounded utterly wrecked, and she sounded real, which, with Chloe, had been 2 entirely different measurements for years. She swore to me she hadn't known about the forged power of attorney. And here is the strange part: I believed her. But it didn't change anything. I asked for help, Eve. She sobbed. Mom told me she'd handle it. I didn't ask how. I didn't ask how. There it was, the entire engine of my family, distilled into one sentence. My sister is not stupid. She had watched 20 years of miraculous rescues arrive from thin air. Rent paid, cars replaced, high-stakes markers cleared. She had learned the one skill that kept the machine running comfortably. Don't ask how. Ignorance in that house wasn't innocence. It was a subscription service. She begged me to drop the complaint for Mom and Dad's sake. Halfway through her begging, her crying changed. It went lower, more desperate, and she told me the truth I suspect no one else had gotten yet. The betting apps were still open on her phone. Right now, during this very call, she had deleted them twice and reinstalled them twice. There was a live parlay running on a West Coast baseball game as we spoke. I closed my eyes. I didn't perform surprise. I'm not withdrawing the complaint, Chloe, I said gently. The way you report poor soil density under a foundation. I'm done paying for damage, but I will pay for one thing once if you wanted treatment. A real inpatient program. I will write the check directly to the facility, never to you. That is my only offer. A long silence followed. The longest of our adult lives. Then my little sister, 34 years old, said the first fully honest sentence I'd heard from her in a decade. I don't know if I can want it yet. That I could actually work with. Wreckage is honest. It's the fake rescue that lies. My father asked to meet me at a diner near Lucas's job site. He brought his heavy metal toolbox in from his truck and set it on the floor, which broke my heart before he even said a word. My dad carries that toolbox the way other men carry flowers. It is his offering, his white flag. His only fluent language. He is 68, but he looked 80. He didn't touch his breakfast. He told me a story I'd only ever had the brief outline of. My mother, 1974. She was 12 years old when her father's local sawmill went under. It wasn't because of drinking or laziness, just shifting market prices, bad weather, and a bank operating on a strict schedule. And the town that had bought that man's lumber for 20 years looked away all at once, in perfect unison. Like a drill they had practiced. The local church said it would pray. The neighbors said absolutely nothing at all. Eleanor wore her cousin's hand me down winter boots for 2 years, took the teasing at school, and stood next to her father at the public auction while local men bid pennies on his heavy equipment. Your mother made a vow standing right there at 12 years old, my dad said softly. This family doesn't let family drown. You've heard her say it your whole life, and you roll your eyes, and I understand why. But you have to know what it is to her. It isn't a rule, it's a scar. He turned his coffee cup in a slow, agonizing half circle on the table. That paper I signed. I knew. Some deep part of me knew. But your mother looked at me like the water was rising to her neck, and Evelyn. I've never once been strong enough to stand on the dry shore while she was in the water. Then he looked up at me with those wet, tired mechanic's eyes. So you'll withdraw the charges, won't you? And I understood that even this, the truest, most vulnerable hour my father had ever given me, had arrived with an invoice. The district attorney's office moved much faster than my family. By September, there was a formal plea agreement on the table. Both of my parents would plead guilty to forgery of a legal instrument and grand theft. The state would recommend a sentencing range, anything from supervised probation to 5 years in state prison. 2 things would weigh the final outcome more than anything else: full financial restitution and the victim impact statement. Mine. Detective Vance explained it in his flat, experienced way. The judge is going to want to know what you want, Mrs. Drake. It matters. In cases like this, it often decides the outcome. So, of course, my mother called. And of course, she had done her research, because she has never once entered a negotiation unprepared. Her voice was the softest I had heard it since childhood. "The lawyer says if you ask for leniency, there won't be any prison, so you'll ask, sweetheart, you'll ask for probation, and we can arrange the restitution over time." And then, here it came, the sentence the entire phone call had been scaffolding for. And then everything can go back to how it was. Back to how it was. I stood at my drafting table, looking at a load diagram while she spoke, and I finally saw the massive design flaw I had been living inside of. How it was the actual disease. How it was required me as the reserve cash tank, Chloe as the permanent leak, Dad as the failing gasket, and Mom as the operator's manual. She wasn't asking me to save her from prison. She was asking me to recertify the very structure that had just collapsed and crushed everyone beneath it. "This family doesn't let family drown," she added quietly. "The old law, the scar doing the talking." "I'll see you in court on Tuesday, Mom," I said, and hung up. Detective Vance called an hour later. "The hearing is Tuesday. Will you be speaking?" I looked at the blank legal pad in front of me. I'm writing. I wrote my impact statement at our kitchen table over 3 agonizing nights, and the wastebasket got the first 2 drafts. Draft 1 was 4 pages of pure indictment. Every single bailout since 2006, itemized, dated, and weaponized, as eloquent as a collapsing construction crane. I read it out loud to the empty kitchen, and immediately heard the voice it was written in. The voice was my mother's favorite currency, guilt. The ledger swung like a bat. I tore it up. If the cure runs on the exact same toxic fuel as the disease, it isn't a cure at all. It's just a franchise. Draft 2 swung hard the other way. 2 paragraphs of absolute mercy. No conditions. Let the judge sort it out. Keep the family peace. Underneath those reasonable sentences, I could hear back to how it was humming like a failing engine bearing. I tore that one up, too. I was sitting there at midnight with a blank 3rd page when Lucas came downstairs in his socks. He looked at the shredded paper in the basket without comment and placed his hand flat on the empty pad, his palm covering most of the page. "Write the thing you could still sign in 10 years, he said. "Not the angriest thing, not the nicest thing, the one that holds." Then he made 2 cups of decaf and sat with me, not reading over my shoulder, just sitting there as a solid counterweight while I found out what I actually wanted. It was the hardest engineering problem I have ever been assigned. At 200 a.m. I wrote the opening line, and my hands were perfectly steady. I knew it was the true draft because it terrified me. "Your Honor, I am not here to ask for prison. The night before the sentencing, we drove out to the cabin, Lucas and I. We slept in sleeping bags on the living room floor, just like we did in 2016 when the place was nothing but exposed studs, plastic tarps, and a single working outlet. Half of our furniture was still missing, and the empty rooms had that swept-clean acoustic echo. But it was a peaceful night. Lucas walked the floor in his socks, pointing out our history like a museum tour guide with sawdust in his blood. The floorboard we had to flip to hide a knot in the wood. The window frame we had to rebuild twice because the first subcontractor botched the weather flashing. The pencil line inside the closet door where he'd marked my height as a joke, and then his own, and then nothing else, because we never had children, and the wall had stopped keeping score. "We built it once," he said, laying his hand flat against the wood. "Hands remember. In the morning, I put on the sharp gray blazer I wear when presenting to zoning boards. It is the armor of a woman who intends to be believed, not pitied. At the door, on an impulse I didn't examine, I went to the staircase, took one of the loose lag bolts from the newel post, and slipped it into my pocket. Engineers need talismans, too. We just prefer ours rated for sheer strength. The county courthouse parking lot was half full when we arrived at 8:40 a.m. The Drake side of the family had arrived early. 2 full rows of them in their Sunday coats and hats. Aunt Clara sat near the aisle. Every face I had known my entire life turned to watch me walk in, and not a single one of them said my name. Courtrooms are much quieter than television leads you to believe. Mostly, it is the sound of rustling paper, a clerk's stapler, and the heavy acoustics of people trying not to be heard breathing. My parents sat at the defense table in clothes I recognized from Easter services. When the judge asked, "How do you plead?" my father said, "Guilty," in a voice like a dropped hand tool. My mother said it clearly, her chin held level. She looked like a woman paying a highway toll she still believed the road had no right to charge. The prosecutor walked through the flow of the money. The altered power of attorney appeared on the projector screen. My real 2020 signature sat right beside its photocopied ghost. The deposit details. The wire transfer to the Emerald Casino, time-stamped exactly 36 hours after the Sterlings had signed. The defense attorney spoke of a family negotiated restitution schedule. I watched the judge's eyebrow rise in the exact same way mine does when a subcontractor tells me a cracked support beam is probably fine. Then the judge shuffled her papers and said the sentence I'd been carried like a heavy load rating for a month. The court understands the victim wishes to be heard. The entire room turned. The Sunday coats, my aunt, my mother's neck going completely rigid. My father closed his eyes, bracing himself, and in the very back row, having arrived silently in a coat far too thin for October, sat my sister, Chloe. Nobody had told me she was coming. I stood up. The heavy bolt in my pocket knocked once against my ribs. I walked to the small wooden podium facing the bench, and I unfolded 2 pages of paper that I knew I could still sign in 10 years. The paper didn't shake. I'd engineered it not to. Before I tell you what I said, let me ask you an honest question from my kitchen to yours. If it were your parents sitting at that defense table and your name on that forged line, would you ask for prison, mercy, or something else entirely? Put it in the comments. I truly want to know, because what I asked the judge for was something nobody in that courtroom saw coming. Least of all my mother. I began with the physical damage. Because I am an engineer, and we always start with the loads, I kept my voice in a flat, objective range. No dramatic adjectives. 5 years of weekends. I told the court, framed, wired, and shingled by the 2 people who actually own it. $59,000 taken from cash buyers who did nothing worse than trust a familiar family name. $26,400 in lock replacements, recovery costs, and legal fees. A walnut writing desk that managed a family through 2 recessions. Sold to a consignment shop for a fraction of its worth. A hand-carved newel post tagged in grease pencil and half, unbolted by strangers paid by the hour. And 1 item, I said, that cannot be appraised. From now on, whenever I see my own signature, I check it. I audit my own name. The defendants did that to me, and no financial restitution schedule can return it. The room was quiet enough to hear the court clerk's chair creak. My mother stared at the defense table. My father watched me and took it, which I noted and will always remember. Then I turned the page, and I heard the rows of Sunday coats lean forward, waiting for the part they had come to hear. The good daughter asking for mercy, the family restored, the giant lump swept back under the rug where it belonged. I gave them the first sentence of the ending I had designed instead. Your Honor, I am not here to ask for prison. Behind me, I heard my mother exhale a long, distinct sigh of relief. In the half-second before I spoke again, I watched her shoulders drop, and I recognized that posture instantly: relief, triumph, and the old structure proving it could hold one more time. But, I continued, I am not here to ask for nothing. I read the court my 3 conditions. In precise order, like a construction specification, 1 full financial restitution, every dollar returned to the Sterlings, and every documented dollar of damage paid to us, on an aggressive court-ordered schedule with teeth, even if satisfying that debt requires the defendants to sell their own home. I pause here because I owe this room the absolute honesty of the price tag. That is the house I grew up in, Your Honor. I learned to draft schematics at a workbench in its garage. I am asking you to order it sold if that is what restitution requires, and I want the record to show I understand exactly what I am asking, and that I am asking for it anyway. 2. Supervised probation in place of prison, with a permanent standing condition barring both defendants from ever executing any financial document, opening any account, or acting on any transaction in another person's name for the duration of the term. 3. That any leniency shown to my parents be strictly conditioned on my sister entering a licensed, certified inpatient treatment program for gambling addiction, because the debt was never the disease, and this court should not fix the paperwork while the leak that flooded it continues to run. I folded my papers and addressed the last part directly to the judge. But not only to him, Your Honor. My family has a saying, this family doesn't let family drown. And we never did. We kept pulling my sister out of the water every single time, so she never once had to learn how to swim. Today, I am officially retiring as the lifeguard.
Mercy, yes. A rescue rope.
No, that is the entirety of my request. I sat down to absolute silence. I heard my mother rise behind me. It was a single word, cracked clean down the middle, and the judge's gavel came down on it instantly. Not unkindly, but the way you close a heavy door against the weather. She caught up with me in the hallway by the water fountain. For the first time in my life, my mother stood in front of me with no script whatsoever. What was left of her was smaller, realer, and went straight for the raw wound. You're making me lose my house. I kept my voice in the exact same level range I had used all morning. No, Mom. A forged signature is making you lose your house. I just declined to pay the ransom for the 20th time. Her face worked. She reached for anger and found it empty. She reached for her law, family doesn't owe, and realized how hollow it sounded in a house of law and dropped it. What came out last was the only true thing left, the thing buried under 50 years of casseroles and empty vows. Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice sounded incredibly young. Respectable is all I've ever had, Evelyn. Since I was 12 years old. You don't know what that's like. I do know, I said, and it stopped her cold. The winter boots, 2 years of teasing, Dad told me. The color drained from her face. It wasn't shame at the forgery. I had stopped expecting that. It was the shame of being fully seen. You survived a town that let your father drown right in front of you, I said quietly, because a courthouse hallway is not a judge's bench. And I wasn't sentencing her. You built an entire religion so it would never happen to you again. Mom, I'm not that town. I was never that town. But I am completely done being your vault. I lifted her hand off my sleeve gently with a simple quarter turn. Done. Aunt Clara stood by the exit doors as I walked through. She stepped aside and then, so small I nearly missed it, she gave me a single, slow nod, the very first vote of a hung jury. And behind me, down the corridor, my sister's voice called out, thin but steady, Eve, that offer for treatment. Does it still stand? The court accepted my structural framework almost entirely. 4 years of supervised probation for each of them. Restitution ordered in full, 59,000 to the Sterlings and 26,400 to us, on a schedule the defense attorney called unforgiving and the judge called long overdue. a standing prohibition on either parent signing or notarizing anything for anyone else. The Eugene house went on the market within the month. I drove past it once when the for sale sign went up, and I forced myself to look, because grief you order is grief you should attend. It sold to a young family in 19 days. As for Chloe, she accepted the treatment offer in the courthouse corridor before she could talk herself out of it. I wrote the check exactly the way I said I would, directly to the clinic, never through her hands. I drove her to the intake facility myself on a rainy Tuesday. We didn't play the radio. At the entrance, she looked at me and said, "I keep waiting for you to say I told you so." I looked at her. "I retired from that job." She laughed and cried at the same time, and walked through the doors. The family group chat spent a season bitterly dividing over me, and then, like any structure loaded far past its limits, quietly went silent. The casseroles found other addresses. One evening in November, Lucas backed his truck up the cabin driveway with something heavy in the bed under a moving blanket. He had that studied, casual look of a man who has been keeping a wonderful secret. He had been running his antique shop search the entire time, week after week. In a barn 40 miles inland, he'd found her. My grandmother's walnut writing desk, tag for 900. With a receipt marked in ballpoint by a clerk who had no idea what they were selling. Previous owner sold in a rush. We carried it inside together, one of us at each end. The way you carry the past when you're lucky. The night after the formal sentencing paperwork cleared, we went out to Solitude Cabin with takeout and Lucas's good socket wrench set. I did the thing I'd been saving the way other people save expensive champagne. I knelt at the bottom of the staircase with my husband holding the flashlight, and I rebolted the newel post. Our newel post. My own hands on the wrench. 2 heavy lag bolts were seated back into fresh, plugged holes torqued perfectly to specification. Because, of course, to spec. The initials E and L came back to perfect plumb under the work light, as straight as the day he carved them. I sat back on my heels and looked at it. And the sentence I'd been circling for 20 years finally came together. I said it out loud to the man on the stairs. I spent 20 years being my family's insurance policy. Today my resignation is official, and it turns out I did need this place. Not just the walls. The boundary. You didn't need it anyway, right? That was their question. 1 line 500 AM, Tokyo. Here is the answer it took a courtroom to write. I needed it the way a bridge needs its weight limit, posted where everyone can read it. Not to keep people off, but to keep the structure standing, so people can cross it safely for another 50 years. Lucas handed me my paper cup of coffee and tapped it against his. We ate our dinner sitting on the 3rd stair. The stair that took an entire August to build, under a house that was quiet in the specific. Beautiful way a structure is quiet when, at long last, every load is sitting on the member designed to carry it. I'm measuring the aftermath carefully, because I don't deal in miracles, and neither should real stories. My parents live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Eugene now. The restitution payments arrive on time. Detective Vance tells me compliance officers rarely see schedules kept this cleanly. And I believe it. My mother has never once been late on an appearance payment. She tells her new neighbors there was a minor administrative misunderstanding about property paperwork, all resolved. Her vow didn't die in that courtroom. Vows like hers don't die. They just lose their line of credit. My father sends me physical things instead of words, which is the only language he has ever truly mastered. A magazine clipping of the Tokyo High Rise project with our firm's name in the caption, folded once, with no note. A specialized wrench that matches the set Lucas lost on a job site. I keep them in a drawer I think of as correspondence. Chloe completed her treatment program and has stayed with it. She goes to recovery meetings on Thursdays in a church basement that smells, she says, of burnt coffee and second chances. 14 months sober now. Last month, my phone buzzed with an image. No text, no caption. Just her 1-year recovery chip held in her open palm, slightly out of focus. I didn't reply with a speech. I sent a simple thumbs up. Recovering people can smell a lifeguard from a mile away, and I am officially retired. Am I calling any of this a happy ending? I'm an engineer. I don't certify a new structure until it has stood through at least one full storm season. And we've had exactly one calm year. But I will say this for the record, the loads are finally sitting on the right supports. The vault is permanently closed. And the daughter, against all odds, is still standing. And the cabin, the place they said I didn't need, found its third life last summer. We started something Lucas named Ridge Weeks, 6 weeks out of the season. We hand the keys over to families like the one I grew up in without realizing it. People warned transparent from being the responsible ones. People supporting someone in recovery. No programs, no lectures. Just a quiet week on the ridge, letting the tide and the trees do their work. My grandmother's desk sits in the study, stocked with writing paper for strangers, which is exactly the job that desk was built for. On the newel post, just below the E and L, Lucas carved one more line in neat, small letters, rebuilt 2026. People trace it with their thumbs and ask us about it. We mostly let the stairs answer. In August, one of our guest mothers, a woman with 3 teenagers and a husband 8 months sober, with eyes that looked exactly like mine used to, found me watering the porch plants and asked me directly, "Why would you do all of this for people you don't even know?" I gave her the truest answer I own, the one that took a forged signature, a dead sale, and a courtroom to earn. Because I know how to swim, I told her. And I finally remembered who paid for the lessons. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she smiled. The tide came in on schedule, asking nobody's permission and needing nobody's rescue. I'm Evelyn Drake, 39 now. This spring, my mother sent me a birthday card with nothing extra written inside, and I put it on my windowsill. Because a boundary is a wall with a mail slot, not a moat. If you take just one thing from my story, let it be this: loving your family does not mean underwriting their worst decisions. Sometimes, the kindest thing a lifeguard can do is teach and then step out of the water. If this story stayed with you, the forged signature, the phone call that stopped a fraudulent sale, the sister who retired as the lifeguard in open court, share it with someone who has always been the responsible one. They'll know exactly why. And if you believe a boundary can be an act of love, subscribe to their secret stories. Every week, another quiet woman finds her voice here. Next week, it might sound just like yours.